let's see. What's the best way to begin? I think the best place to begin is to recognize what an interesting and profound and energetically powerful experience our emotions are. And it's also kind of to pay attention to the fact that they're such an important part of our lives. And yet we have very little training in the same way that we're not trained very well to work with our own minds. For the most part, we're not trained at all to work with our emotions. And we tend to pick up the habit of dealing with the energy and the intensity and sometimes the discomfort of our emotional states through our families and also through our culture, because cultures are quite different in terms of how they relate and deal with emotion. One of the things that those of you who have done other courses with me have heard me talk about is that all cultures feel, but the way in which feeling is related with and communicated is very, very different. Some cultures are very expressive and much more explicit with emotion, while some cultures are less expressive, and also the meaning making is held more implicitly in a more subtle way. So, for example, I just did an interview with a friend of mine who's an integralist in the integral community, who's German. And we were talking about the difference in American culture and German culture. So American culture tends to be explicit in terms of meaning and also expressive in terms of emotion. Now, there's certainly variations. The way emotion is expressed in Salt Lake City is quite different than New York City. The way emotion is expressed in Atlanta is quite different than it might be in Seattle. But generally speaking, Americans on the whole tend to be more direct, both in terms of the meaning and also in terms of the expression. But German culture, for example, is known to be very direct and explicit in terms of meaning, but inexpressive in terms of emotion. In other words, emotions aren't sort of owned and expressed so much in the social sphere. Now, I think within consciousness circles, that may or may still not be the case. And I noticed Nina Nisar's on the call. What's your sense of that? Because Nina's German. I don't want to stereotype Germans without letting you weigh in. So,
hi, Di. Hi, everyone. Yeah. Well, I guess stereotypes do have a piece of truth. So that's fair. And also the distinction that you make around, maybe a more conscious movement, also younger generations, generations that travel more, that have more exposure to different cultures. I see a big difference there. But generally, there's a bit of that sense of there's a disconnect between the thinking thing and the feeling thing,
Yeah. And how the feeling thing is related with and communicated.
Totally. Mm-hmm.
So the idea of emotional development is really that we can literally grow and develop in relationship to our emotional lives. And in a way, what Nina's pointing to is that emotional maturity would mean that our cognition, our way of thinking, our felt experience, and the body are all one. They're coherent, right? There's a continuity, if you will, between our minds and our bodies. And there's an ability in some ways to feel more fully if we tend to suppress feeling, or there's an ability to experience feeling and let it go much more, let's say, effectively than some of us who come from more over-feeling cultures, and I mean family and culture, we'll find ourselves swamped by emotion, and they're hard to let go of. Once we start to feel, we keep feeling, and we keep feeling, and we keep feeling. And there's a point at which it's hard to know, well, what is the sweet spot? Because our operating assumption is that emotions are intelligent, they're communicative, they are immediate, they tend to connect us to one another. When we watch a film and there's, let's say, a kind of a moving scene and the whole audience is feeling moved. It's like we get to have the experience of that kind of oneness when we feel strongly. Right? So there's a power in emotion that we also want to be able to work with at the same time, because they're the source of pain or confusion or overwhelm. Sometimes we put a limit on our ability to feel. So what this course is really about is really affirming the role of emotions in our conscious life, but I want to give us the tools to be able to work with them in a way that they are part of the wholeness of our body, mind, and our environment, that they enhance our experience rather than detract from it, that they connect us to others rather than alienate us. And all of that is a little bit of a tall order.